So the topic for today is factoring by grouping. And as you'll see here under the title, factoring by grouping, it says this is a strategy that we can use to factor polynomials that have 4 terms. It doesn't work on odd numbers of terms, okay? This only works on even numbers of terms. So, 4 terms, it works. It doesn't always work, but I'm not going to give you ones that don't work for right now. So this strategy has 3 steps to it, and you should remember this from Algebra 1. The first step is draw parentheses to make 2 groups. Then, from each of the 2 groups, we're going to factor out the greatest common factor. And then, we're going to factor out the common binomial factor, if there is one. And we did that when we factored out the greatest common factor. We said sometimes the greatest common factor could be a binomial, and we would factor that out. So let's go through an example. And this first example is written out here for you. So the first thing we have is a polynomial with 4 terms. The first step is to put parentheses around the first 2 terms and parentheses around the last 2 terms. And notice something. In between them, I'm leaving a plus sign. All right? That doesn't go away. I'm leaving that in between, and it is very important. So the next thing I'm going to do is from this first group, I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor, which happens to be x squared. When I take that out, what I have left in the parentheses is x plus 3. Now I'm going to go to the second group, factor out the greatest common factor, which in this case is 2. When I take out a 2, I have an x left here and a 3 left here, x plus 3. Now is my third step, where notice what I have is a greatest common binomial factor, x plus 3, and I'm going to factor that out. I bring that to the front, and what's left in the second set of parentheses is x squared plus 2. All right? So let's go ahead and do the next one. Now, when I have ones that have all pluses, I kind of just draw my parentheses right on the problem. But if you have minuses, you've got to actually kind of rewrite this a little bit. So first of all, I'm going to draw my parentheses. And I'm going to leave that plus in the middle. All right, from my first group, I'm going to factor out my greatest common factor, which is x squared. And in parentheses, what I have left is x plus 2. Now, in my second group, guess what? My greatest common factor is 1. That's it. So I'm going to write the 1 here. And I have x plus 2 left. Now notice that I have a common binomial factor. And if you don't, you can't go further. You have to stop. But if you do, you can go to this last step. And that step is to factor out the greatest common binomial factor of x plus 2. And then what you have left is x squared plus 1. And that goes in your second parenthesis. And what you'll find is if you take this and you FOIL it, you should get this. May not be in the same order, but you're going to have all the same terms. That's how you can check that you've done this correctly. Now, the next example has a minus in it. And so we have to do something a little bit different to accommodate that situation. And the key is it has a minus here. It doesn't matter anywhere else, but if it's in the middle, we have to do something special. And that is, we can't leave it between the 2 groups. We have to have a plus there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this minus sign inside that second parentheses. So when I write my parentheses, I've got 3x squared minus 12x, And instead of leaving a minus here, I'm going to put a plus here, and I'm going to move the minus inside the parentheses. So I have negative 5x plus 20 in the parentheses. It's very important that you do that, or your signs will get all mixed up, and you won't have a common binomial factor, and you'll be stuck. All right, so that's why this is very important. Now, what this means, my next step is to factor out the greatest common factor. From my first group, my greatest common factor is 3x. That leaves me with x minus 4. Now, from my second group, notice what I'm hoping that I end up with is an x minus 4. If I just take out a 5 from here, I'm going to have negative x plus 4 left. I don't want that. I want x minus 4. So instead of factoring out the greatest common factor of 5, what I'm going to factor out is a negative 5. So that's what we're going to do right here. Factor out negative 5. So when I do that, I'm going to have a minus 5 here. That's going to change this sign to positive and this sign to a minus sign. Very important. Or what ends up happening is you don't have a common binomial factor, you can't go further, and you're stuck. All right? Now, notice that these two are the same, so it's a common binomial factor. I can factor that out to the front, x minus 4. And what I have left here is 3x minus 5. All right, let's do another example like that. We've got one in example D at the bottom of the page. So again, we've got a negative in the middle. Of the three signs, the middle one is a negative. So we don't want to just put our parentheses here. We want to rewrite this and put a plus in the middle and put that negative inside the second group. So this is going to be xy minus 2y. Make a plus here. Put the negative x inside the parentheses. From my first group, factor out the greatest common factor, which is y, and that's going to leave me x minus 2. Here, I have negative x plus 2, and my greatest common factor is 1. But I want this and this to be the same, and they aren't. So instead of factoring out a 1, I'm going to factor out a negative 1. So let's put a little arrow here. Factor out negative 1. So bring out a negative 1. That changes this to positive x and this to minus 2. Now notice that I do have a common binomial factor and that I can factor that out to the front. So I have x minus 2, and what is left is a y minus 1. All right, let's go to the next page. Let's take a look at this first example here. And this first example has an issue. Let's look at it over here in this box, because I kind of diverted to this box. It says if you draw parentheses to make two groups, you have xy minus 2 plus, then put your negative in here, so you have negative 2y plus x. Neither of the two groups has a GCF other than 1. All right, that's a problem. Here's why. Because if you factor out a 1 from here, and you factor out a 1 from here, or even a negative 1, you still have two binomials that are not the same. So you can't factor out a common binomial factor, and you can't continue, and you're stuck. All right? So maybe this one doesn't work, because sometimes they don't. but we haven't checked to make sure that it does. Sometimes it's just that the terms aren't matched up nicely. So what we're going to do is we're going to rearrange them and check this again. And the way that you rearrange is you're going to switch the second and the third term. All right? And that changes what is grouped with what. All right? If you switch like the first and the second, you're not changing what's grouped with what, and that's the issue. So switch the second and third terms and try again. Remember, take their signs with them. So I have xy minus 2y minus 2 plus x. And now what I want to do is I'm going to try this again. So I'm going to put parentheses in here, and I'm going to have xy minus 2y, put a plus, and put a negative 2 plus x in parentheses. Let's try this again. Oh, we have a greatest common factor here, and that greatest common factor is y. And that leaves me x minus 2. Now here's the interesting thing. Out of here, our greatest common factor is 1. But this and this don't look the same, but they are the same. They both have a positive x and a negative 2. So in fact, they are the same. So we don't need to factor out a negative 1. Then our signs wouldn't match up. So we're just going to factor out a positive 1. But to make this a little easier on the eyes, when I write this here, I'm just going to switch the order of these two. I'm going to make it positive x minus 2. This is a little easier on the eyes. And now it's clear that I have a common binomial factor. I can factor that out to the front as x minus 2. And in parentheses, I have y plus 1. All right, so let's take a look at example B. All right, example B. If I group this, here's what I've got. 4ab plus 1 plus, and I have negative 2a minus 2b in parentheses. Now, out of this first group, I don't have a greatest common factor other than 1. Out of the second group, I can factor out a 2, but here's the thing. Even if I do that, I'm not going to have a greatest common binomial factor. I'm going to have this, 1 times 4ab plus 1. Even if I factor out a negative 2, that'll leave me positive a plus b. There's no common binomial factor, so I'm stuck. All right? But before you give up, remember the trick about switching the two middle terms, the second term and the third term. So switch the second and third terms. And we're going to try again. All right? So here's what we've got. I'm going to cross this out because this isn't going to work. 4ab, put the minus 2a next, then the plus 1 minus 2b. Now, because I have a plus in the middle, I can just draw my parentheses. All right, my greatest common factor in my first group is 2a. So factor that out, and it leaves me with 2b minus 1. Now, if I look at this, my greatest common factor is 1. But if I factor out a 1, this and this are not the same. They have different signs. So in order to make them the same, I've got to factor out a negative 1. All right, so factor out a negative 1. This is going to make this negative 1 and plus 2b. Now, I know these don't look the same, but they are. They both have a positive 2b and a negative 1. They are the same. You can factor that out to the front. So 2b minus 1 to the front And in parentheses, I have what's left, which is 2a minus 1. All right, let's go to this third example here. And again, first thing I'm going to do, draw my parentheses. So 3xy minus 4 plus, put the negative inside the second parentheses, negative 6x plus 2y. From my first group, I have a greatest common factor of 1. From my second group, I can factor out, in fact, a negative 2 if I want, but what that's going to give me is 3x minus y. And look at, my binomial factors are not the same, so I'm stuck. So at this point, we want to check the order. So try doing this. Switch the second and third terms. So here's what I've got. I'm going to cross this out because this was no good. And I've got 3xy minus 6x minus 4 plus 2y. And now I'm going to draw my parentheses in. So I've got 3xy minus 6x in the first parentheses plus, put the negative in the second parentheses. And now I am going to try and factor out my greatest common factor, see if this works. So out of my first group, my greatest common factor is 3x. That leaves me y minus 2. Out of my second group, my greatest common factor is 2. And I need to think about whether I want to factor out a 2 or a negative 2, because these don't look like they're going to end up the same. But I want a positive y, and I want a negative constant here. So really all I'm going to factor out is a positive 2. When I do that, that leaves me negative 2 plus y. And even though these two binomials don't look the same right now, they are because they have the same signs. The y is positive, the 2 is negative. So factor that y minus 2 out to the front. And in parentheses, we have what remains, which is 3x plus 2.